Hi, I'm Ed Highland at the MD&M West News Desk, and I'm joined now by Lisa Pierce, the Executive Director for Packaging Digest. Thank you so much for coming by.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now let's talk about Packaging Digest. I mean, it's been around almost as long as I have, since 1963.
Almost as long as I have too. I'm embarrassed to mention that, but I'll do it. Yes, we have been around for more than 50 years. And the packaging professionals, primarily in North America, primarily in the United States, have looked to us as the trusted source for packaging news and trends, especially emerging trends, which is not always easy to do in an industry that's as dynamic as this. And we also cover best practices and new technologies. So we're been around for a while, primarily in America, but do have a global audience.
Well, what's trending right now? What are your readers most interested in?
Well, sustainability is embedded in virtually everything that is happening in packaging today, whether it be engineering on the packaging machinery side, or design, new product development, logistics, a lot going on in logistics. Some of it being COVID related, with there being a lot more e-commerce products and packaging for that. So there's a lot of things going on, but sustainability, I would say, is probably the key one, because it really is embedded in almost everything that's happening.
Well, a lot of talk at MD&M West, as well as Westpac, revolves around the cannabis industry, packaging in particular. Cannabis, of course, a dynamic, growing market. How is the cannabis industry impacting packaging?
Well, I just came from a session I moderated that was about cannabis packaging design trends. And it was an hour-long session that could have easily have gone twice as long. You nailed it, Ed, because you said the cannabis industry is growing. It's growing leaps and bounds. And one of the things that came out of that panel that we just did was the fact that even though this is an emerging industry, emerging market, there's a lot of challenges, but one of the things that they're able to do is learn from the mistakes of other markets, and literally like leapfrog some of the ideas, some of the packaging technologies, and kind of bypass a lot of the pain that some of the other consumer product goods markets went through. And they're learning very fast. It's amazing that in such a short period of time, they've gone from the basics of literally a baggie to extremely sophisticated packaging that not only protects the product from moisture and light, and child resistance is a big deal for them. But it not only does that, but it also has branding and marketing, and it's got to catch people's attention immediately at dispensaries with very little interaction with the consumer until they get it home, because most of those packages are behind a counter or in a display case separate from that. So they've got some pretty creative ideas on how they're reaching their consumer with the messages that they need to reach the consumers with.
And yet, while they're doing all this, they're also working, I'll use the term void, because there hasn't been a great deal. There's been a lot of talk, but hasn't been a great deal in the way of regulations. Governments are trying to come up with things. Different governments have different ideas. It just seems like it would spin your head around, leave you in a cloud, so to speak.
Yeah, well, a lot of people think that from a regulatory point of view, the cannabis market is really the Wild West. And one of the things that makes that difficult is the state-by-state differences. And yet, the cannabis marketers and the growers talk about when it gets to the federal level, when we're going to get one regulation across the board. And it's almost like they want that, but sometimes I think it's also, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. So, but it is interesting. It does make it challenging for them. One of the things, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, about the whole idea of maybe being able to leapfrog certain developments is the whole direct-to-consumer market and e-commerce, and how COVID accelerated so much of that, that the cannabis market actually benefited from, because they're in it. They're able to do that a lot easier than some of the limitations that they have from a packaging design point of view for the dispensaries, which are all over the place, as you already mentioned. Yeah. So, it's actually really fun to see this market grow and go from the basics of baggies all the way to the very sophisticated packaging. And yet they still do have a lot of challenges. Hopefully we'll be able to help them out with some of the sourcing challenges that they have with our can pack exhibits here, and the educational portion of our can pack cannabis packaging conference.
You're talking about an industry that's evolved over a relatively short span of time.
Very
but
short.
Packaging Digest has been around over 50 years. Or almost 50 years. You're talking about Westpac's 35th anniversary. What do you look in your crystal ball? Where do you see all this going over the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, there's so many different aspects to the packaging industry. We can talk about it from the point of view of machinery and production. The products don't get to shelf without being packaged automatically. And so there's that whole business there. But the automation end of things, we talk about how important it is, and it is an imperative for a whole lot of reasons, but I predict that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be extremely busy with what I call AI. And yes, AI means artificial intelligence, and yes, there's going to be a lot of developments with AI. But I also use AI to define actual intelligence. And that's people. And we're getting into an extremely serious dearth of skilled workers. And I know it's not just in the the packaging area. I think companies throughout America are going to hurt a lot moving forward, trying to find skilled and willing and enthusiastic workers to help them out moving forward.
These workers that hopefully the industry will find, one of the aspects that they're going to have to either learn or come into the process with is sustainability. That, going green, if you will, just in a caption, is something that is an incredible part of every industry, whether they're operating on you or whether they're packaging cannabis. What can be some of the highest priorities, if you will, for the industry when it comes to going green?
Consumers are pretty sharp these days, and one of the highest priorities to me for the packaging industry is to not greenwash. And a lot of companies have sustainability goals and sustainable packaging goals, as they well should. But those goals really need to be rooted in right, what I call is right, and that is the consumers are looking for ethical businesses, truthful businesses, and they want companies that can use science and weigh their options from a packaging point of view to communicate their brand message. So some of the challenge moving forward from a sustainability point of view, and it's been a challenge for the last 20 years as well. It's not like it. The companies don't know what what they need to work on. And that's the whole communication with their consumers and trying to tell them what they're doing from a sustainability point of view in an effective and compelling way to get them to pick their product over somebody else's. And sometimes the education isn't as easy as you would think. You know, there's all kinds of ways of sharing information with the consumers, but seriously, one of the best ways is to do it on pack. And yet you're limited with space, you're limited with, you know, you don't want it to be so busy that there's words all over the
or
package.
Preachy or whatever.
Or too preachy, yeah, the language, all of that. So I think that we're gonna see some brands continue to get better at that. It's sustainable packaging is no longer the recycling code that's on the bottom of the bottle. We have gone so much further than that these days, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But a lot of companies are doing some really amazing things from a sustainable packaging point of view, and yet they're still struggling with how to communicate that to their customers, how to tell them, and have it be meaningful for their customers.
Well, give us an example. What do you see as you see an awful lot of packaging concepts and designs and everything. So give us maybe somebody that's doing it right in your opinion, who really is something that jumps out at you in the industry right now.
Well, okay, so you asked for somebody who's doing it right. Could I spin that around and give you an example of some of the things that they're doing wrong, in my opinion? Okay, so I'm not going to name names, but the brand owners that are doing this, that are out there, they know who they are. So over the last 5 years, there's been an anti-plastic packaging movement and an anti-single-use packaging movement. So the single-use packaging doesn't necessarily have to be plastic, and the plastic package doesn't necessarily have to be single-use. If you have a single-use plastic packaging, you're, oh my goodness, nobody wants that these days, supposedly. Then COVID hits, and all of a sudden hygiene and cleanliness, which hygiene and cleanliness are the same word, but anyways, that became paramount, and all of a sudden single-use plastic packaging was, you know, almost a savior.
Yeah, desirable, yeah.
Desirable. So I guess I would say that from a, you know, the right thing to do is to realize that every package has its pros and cons. And it's not necessarily the material, sometimes it is, but not necessarily the material so much as it is the whole system of the packaging. If it's a plastic package, single use, that is highly recycled, like the PET water bottles that you see everywhere, that's the highest, well, from a plastic packaging point of view, that's the highest recycled plastic packaging that's out there. And there's a demand for that recycled material. Don't fight it. Go with it. Go with it. But you know what? I did think of a positive, a little bit more of a positive message too. Yeah. End on a high note. So some of the creative designs that I'm seeing now also embed the sustainability aspect to it. And there's a relatively new initiative from a company called Loop. And it's a shopping platform that is really centered on luxury, reusable packaging, and an entire system developed for the delivery and the pickup of these reusable packages that really took the industry by storm about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And it's recently expanded, so the concept seems to be doing well with consumers. And some of the packages that are being developed for that platform are absolutely stunning, absolutely stunning. And it does hit one of the other trends that it hits too is that direct-to-consumer e-commerce shipping aspect. So a lot going on, but thanks for your questions. It's been fun.
You know how success will take and breed more success, so other people will copy, and so that's one of the greatest compliments, I guess, in any industry. So
that's what they say, yes.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And this is The News Desk. I'm Ed Hyland.